Unexpected connections might occasionally take us in directions we never planned. I'm Rachel, a 34-year-old lady who has been wed to Kyle for nearly a decade. We live comfortably in a nice suburban home with two lovely kids, Sophie and Max. As high school sweethearts, Kyle and I survived college, professions, and the tumultuous world of childrearing. Love, trust, and a common goal for our future together served as the foundation for our marriage. However, the holes in our idyllic life became apparent when Kyle's cousin Ethan moved in for a bit, and everything I believed to be true about my marriage and myself started to fall apart. Growing up, Ethan and Kyle were almost like brothers. Even though Ethan lived on the opposite side of the nation, they had a close kinship because they had spent several summers together at their grandparents' house. The one who was always on the go and never settled down was Ethan. He was the one who had wild tales to tell and who had an unrestrained life. Kyle was ecstatic when he arrived at our door and stated that he wanted a respite from his wandering ways. However, I was a little cautious. Even though Ethan was endearing, I realized that his presence may upset the equilibrium we had worked so hard to achieve. I had heard all the stories. Our home felt changed as soon as Ethan moved in. He was excellent with the children, courteous, and helpful. Kyle was thrilled to see his cousin again, and Sophie and Max loved him. However, it was difficult to ignore the enthusiasm that Ethan exuded. He was charming and engaging, and he exuded an intimidating yet seductive confidence. His attention was addicting, and he had a way of making you feel like the most intriguing person in the room. As usual, Kyle was working late one evening. I was sitting on the couch, catching up on some business emails while the kids were in bed. Ethan arrived with a few beers and settled down beside me. He handed me one of the bottles and said, "Would you mind if I joined you?" After a brief moment of hesitation, I shrugged. Yes, why not? The day has been long. We sat there and spoke about nothing specific. Even the most routine chat felt exciting because of Ethan's ability to make it so. We discussed his recent adventures, his trips, and the locations he still wished to see. It was fantastic to find myself laughing more than I had in a long time. Just sitting with someone and talking about anything and everything was something I had missed a lot. Ethan once turned to face me with a more serious than normal expression. "You've got a really nice setup here, Rachel. A wonderful husband, fantastic children, this lovely house. You're living the good life." I nodded and grinned. Yes, I suppose I am. However, it's not always simple. I sometimes feel like I'm trying to keep everything from coming apart while juggling a million things at once. With his gaze fixed on mine, Ethan leaned back. "Well, you make it seem so easy. You're fortunate to have Kyle. To be honest, I have no idea how you manage." I was surprised by what he said. I had worked hard to keep our family afloat, and it had been a while since anyone had recognized it. A feeling of gratitude and something more I couldn't quite put my finger on filled me with warmth. "Thank you, Ethan. That is very significant." The conversation flowed naturally as we carried on. I hadn't felt seen in years, but Ethan had a way of making me feel that way. He seemed to be able to relate to all of my unsaid concerns and ideas. As the evening went on, I became aware that I was spending far more time with him than I ought to have, and I was afraid of that realization. I started to look forward to our late-night conversations over the course of the following several days. The kids would go to bed, Kyle would work late, and Ethan and I would end up sitting on the couch drinking beer and telling stories. It had become a pattern. I assured myself it was harmless, just two individuals having fun together. However, there was a tension that simmered just beneath the surface, an unmistakable spark. Ethan proposed that we go a movie one evening. Kyle was still at the office, the kids were asleep, and I was too exhausted to protest. We decided on a timeless classic that was sentimental and light. I felt his arm slide across mine as we sat side by side. Even though it was the slightest touch, it made me shudder. I gave him a quick glance, and our eyes briefly locked. Something in his eyes, a mixture of love, curiosity, and something forbidden, made my heart accelerate. I hurriedly averted my gaze in an attempt to concentrate on the film, but I couldn't get rid of the sensation that Ethan was observing me. I felt a knot form in my stomach and my pulse speed. This was incorrect. Kyle had a cousin named Ethan. He belonged to the family. However, the tug grew stronger the more I attempted to explain it. I got up after the movie was over because I suddenly needed some space. With a little hesitancy, I responded, "I should go to bed." With an inscrutable gaze, Ethan nodded. "Yes, without a doubt. Rachel, good night." Mind racing, I withdrew to my room. I kept thinking about Ethan while I laid in bed with Kyle. His laugh, his grin, and the way he made me feel. Whatever this was, I knew I had to stop it before it got out of control. However, each time I made the decision to stay away, I kept getting pulled back in. One Saturday afternoon, things reached a breaking point. Ethan and I were alone at home since Kyle had taken the kids to a birthday celebration. Ethan entered the living room while I was folding clothes, his hair still wet after a shower. He took a seat on the couch and stared at me. After a time, he continued, "You know, I'm really glad I came and stayed here. It's been a little different. Nice, but not the same." Unconfident in my ability to talk, I nodded. Every word hung heavily between us and the air felt electrified. It was nearly intolerable to feel his eyes on me. "Rachel," Ethan whispered quietly, disturbing the quiet, "I believe we should discuss what has been happening." My heart thumping in my chest, I froze. Hearing him speak it aloud made it seem all too real, even though I understood precisely what he was talking about. "We can't, Ethan. This is incorrect." He got up and stepped forward, his face solemn. "I am aware that it is wrong. However, I can no longer ignore it. Rachel, I like you a great deal, and I believe you share my sentiments." I looked away in an attempt to gather my thoughts. The truth was right in front of me, but I wanted to reject it and tell him he was mistaken. I shouldn't have, but I did feel something for him, and I was more afraid of that than anything else. My voice was shaking as I muttered, "We can't do this. I adore Kyle. He is a decent dude. Furthermore, this, whatever it is, cannot occur." Ethan's hand touched my arm as he reached out. Even though it was a straightforward gesture, it startled me. I retreated, taking a step away from him. "Please, Ethan, simply let it go." His face dropped as he nodded. "I apologize, Rachel. I didn't intend to complicate matters. I simply had to tell the truth." I was left alone with my whirling feelings as I saw him turn and leave the room. Even though I knew I had made the correct decision, it didn't make things any simpler. I tried to ignore the interaction for the remainder of the day, concentrating on the children and maintaining the appearance of normalcy. For another week, Ethan remained with us, but things had changed. There was an unpleasant tension that none of us understood how to handle in place of the easy companionship we had shared. I tried not to be alone myself with him, and he stayed away. Even though it was for the best, it still hurt. I was both relieved and heartbroken when Ethan's departure was finally imminent. He thanked Kyle for allowing him to stay, packed his luggage, and hugged the children. However, there was a brief, quiet farewell that spoke more than words could ever express when he turned to face me. I felt the weight of what might have been but never was as I watched him drive off. Kyle didn't have any suspicions. He saw Ethan's visit as a chance to catch up with family and have some fun. I buried our secret deep in the hopes that the feelings would eventually disappear. The memory of Ethan's touch, his words, and the way he made me feel seen in a manner I hadn't felt in years, however, persisted even as the days stretched into weeks. Determining to be the best wife and mother I could be, I immersed myself into my family. I made an effort to improve my connection with Kyle and remind myself of the reasons we initially fell in love. And gradually, I began to feel like myself once more. However, I couldn't help but think of Ethan during the quiet times when I was by myself with my thoughts. I pondered whether he ever considered me, whether he felt guilty about the near miss, or whether he was glad that we didn't cross that boundary. I see now how easily things may have turned out differently, how things might have been different with just one more touch or time. However, I ultimately made a decision. I went with my marriage, my family, and the life we had created together. Although it wasn't simple, it was the proper course of action. Our internal conflicts can occasionally be the most difficult to overcome. It's simple to fall victim to the seduction of something novel and thrilling, and temptation is strong. But during those times, it's critical to keep in mind what truly counts. The people we care about, the promises we've made, and the life we've put so much effort into building. I hope you keep in mind that you have a choice if you ever find yourself in a similar circumstance. Furthermore, it's not always easy to make the appropriate decision, but it's the one that will return you to the life you fought so hard to preserve, the people you love, and the ones who need you, because that's what really counts in the end.